I got to be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen. I am genuinely surprised and shocked just how much Dragon Age the Veilguard truly ruined these people over at BioWare. I'm talking about emotionally destroyed, mentally ruined, all kinds of ruination that's happening here, all because this game was completely rejected by gamers, right? They just don't like to admit the fact that what they did with Dragon Age the Veilguard was wholly rejected, and they're trying to look at everybody that they possibly can and point the finger and blame them, right? The biggest scapegoat right now for Dragon Age the Veilguard is none other than EA themselves. The developers over at BioWare have been pointing the finger at EA and saying, well, it's their fault as the reason why the game flopped. It's their fault as to the reason why the game is the way it is. But the hilarious thing is that there's developers inside of BioWare that say, no, we made the game that we wanted to make. We made the exact game that we wanted to make. Woke and all, we wanted to make it. That's what we wanted to do. So you have an internal battle that's happening here. And Mark Darrah, who is not even I know he consulted on Veilguard, but he didn't even work on Veilguard in the standard sense. He consulted on Veilguard, and he's been constantly, since the game's failure, trying to make everything else the blame, right? EA, whoever, they're trying to make everything else the blame. Well, now he is telling the Mass Effect developers to utilize Dragon Age the Veilguard as a scapegoat to defend itself against EA. This guy has a massive hard-on against Electronic Arts. Let's talk about it. So he's a BioWare veteran who shares his advice for the developers working on Mass Effect 5 as the studio goes all in on its sci-fi series. But this advice relates to BioWare's fraught relationship with EA, something Darrah had to navigate for years. Surprisingly, his advice is to scapegoat Dragon Age the Veilguard. Darrah, who is a consultant on the Veilguard, says that the Mass Effect team could use the game's failure, at least in the eyes of EA, to get the resources and freedom it needs for its own game. Now, one thing he made a claim to was that BioWare, unfortunately, there was always favoritism being played there, according to Darrah, right? So they always claimed that EA favored Mass Effect over Dragon Age because EA apparently had trouble understanding how to make Dragon Age a mainstream success. And in my opinion, I think it goes both hand in hand. I think BioWare also had trouble trying to make Dragon Age a mainstream success after their massive success of Dragon Age Origins, right? Even Inquisition, one of their highest selling games, if not their highest selling game, people had issues with. And then you have Dragon Age Veilguard, which is not even on anybody's radar. If you guys forgot just how bad Dragon Age Veilguard actually did, remember, they score on players engaged. They don't score on copies sold. And even with players engaged, Dragon Age Veilguard missed the EA expectations by 50% plus. So the game did half of what it was projected to do, and to be honest with you, it was probably more than that. But he says he urges the developers to do this even if the scapegoating isn't quite accurate, since it could help EA actually listen to the developers. Now, this comes from Mark Darrah's interview with YouTuber Mr. Matty Plays. Here, Darrah reflects on the current state of BioWare and shares his optimism about Mass Effect 5's development, even after Dragon Age the Veilguard's fate. You know what's hilarious? These journalists refuse to say that Dragon Age the Veilguard was a failure. They don't want to use the term that the game was a failure, right? They'll even try to convince you that the game was a win and that everybody else is just wrong about it being a failure. That's what they tried to do. It's actually kind of hilarious. I do think this is less messy, says Darrah, referring to Mass Effect 5 at around the 1320 mark. To be frank, the Mass Effect team is going to be able to point to the Veilguard and say we should steer away from some of these things because look what happened. And we all know what these things are. We all know what Mass Effect may most likely be steering away from, which is identity politics. If they were smart, they would stay clear away from that. Nobody's saying you can't have gay relationships because that was always in Mass Effect for the most part. But if you're talking about pronouns, if you're talking about transgender ideology, if you're talking about everything that will literally take you out of the experience, then that's going to be a big problem, just like it was in Dragon Age the Veilguard. You may want to say, oh, that's not the reason why the game failed. Sure, you can cope, but at the end of the day, it was definitely part of it, and adding to it on already a slippery slope is not exactly a great idea. As much as that stings, especially for the developers who worked hard to turn the Veilguard into something that can be shipped after EA kept supposedly interfering with its development, Darrah says the team should do it anyway. I would honestly encourage the team to scapegoat Veilguard as much as they need to get what they need from the organization, whether it's true or not. So he's flat out saying they should lie to EA to get what they want. It's insane. Of course, this isn't Darrah himself scapegoating the Veilguard. Not only did he consult on the game, but he also bigged it up prior to launch and defended the developers from the supposed abuse they received. And again, These are the developers that would go out there and attack people quite often. They would make certain statements quite often. Their game is a literal attack on just anything that's even remotely normal. They try to consider it to be one of these things where they're like, "Oh, we're just telling our story. We're telling our identity story." It's like, bro, nobody wants to see that shit. Just like nobody wants to hear a straight person talk about how much straight things they do all the time. Nobody wants to hear that, bro. We're playing Dragon Age right now. Like, we're trying to play in a fantasy world, and I'm running around and I'm seeing people with trans scars from real life. Like, what the fuck are we doing, bro? This makes no sense. But in any case, however, given that Darrah and others from BioWare have repeatedly said that EA is difficult to work with and struggles to grasp what makes gamers want from RPGs, this might be the only way to get the higher-ups to understand. As Darrah himself says elsewhere in the same interview, keep in mind, again, like I said earlier in the video, the BioWare developers have openly said that they made the game they wanted to make. All right, not this whole like scapegoating with EA. EA's the problem. EA's the fault. Whatever. No, they said they made the game they wanted to make. So if Dragon Age: The Veilguard is the game they wanted to make with the story and identity politics and everything under the sun, then it's pretty clear that this is what they wanted to do from the start, or at least somewhat what they wanted to do from the start. You can talk about EA being difficult to work with all you want. You could blame them for the reason why the game failed, but they flat out said they made the game they wanted to make. But unfortunately, the Dragon Age team was not granted that luxury, supposedly, until it was too late to course correct. The Veilguard had to be made from the bones of a scrap multiplayer Dragon Age game that pretty much nobody wanted. And it's hilarious because nobody wanted a live service Dragon Age game, so you ended up making a identity politics driven nonsensical Dragon Age game that nobody also wanted as well. So you replaced one Dragon Age game that nobody wanted with another one that nobody wanted. Great job to the BioWare team that worked on that game. But in any case, Darrah also said that EA wouldn't greenlight remasters or remakes of the first 3 Dragon Age games, so it doesn't seem that the publisher ever had much faith in the fantasy series. I don't think that's true at all. I think Dragon Age Origins was pretty much proof that the game could definitely, the franchise as a whole could definitely be a massive hit. If you guys don't have any faith in RPGs like Dragon Age Origins, I will just point the finger to Baldur's Gate 3. It's pretty clear that as long as you give the gamers what they want and you make it good and you do the right thing, you will be rewarded with their money. You may not be as successful as Baldur's Gate 3, but once the word gets out there about your game and how things have changed and how you're doing the right thing, it's only a matter of time before you start making money. Even if you don't come out the gate swinging necessarily, you will make up your money, even through a multitude of different sales or whatever. You'll make it back up. I think they are just using for any excuse. They're looking for any excuse, I should say, that to blame Dragon Age, instead of just blaming themselves. These developers that were behind Dragon Age, they chose to do what they wanted to do. And EA, sure, they might have been difficult to work with, but at the end of the day, you've worked with them before. Surely you could work with them now. I think what it is a lot of mismanagement, a lot of waste of funds. I think a lot of just excuses that are being thrown around, not only by leadership, but also developers in general. There's a lot of excuses when it comes to Dragon Age: The Veilguard, but all the excuses in the world doesn't excuse that you motherfuckers made Taj, okay? Like, Taj is one of the worst written characters that I think I have ever seen in gaming in at least the last 5 years, maybe even longer than that. I'm not kidding. So anyway, you guys let me know in the comments down below. What do you think about this? What do you think about Dragon Age: The Veilguard being used as a scapegoat for Mass Effect? What do you think about Mass Effect 5's future development? Whatever it may be, leave it in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting that like and subscribe button as we are on the road to 98K. And I will see you guys on the next one.